Welcome to the Israel Daily News. Shay Khatiri, you are an interesting person. You've lived a few different lives in a few different places, and you are here today to talk to us about Iran and Israel and the powers that be in the geopolitical sphere today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shanna. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to our conversation together.
So I'm really excited about having your perspective on our show because one thing that I really have a gripe about is I feel that there's a few different groups that often people are talking over and not enough people get to speak for themselves. I think Iranians, there's always a lot of representation from non-Iranians about Iran and about the Iranian regime. As well as I feel that way about Palestinians. I feel that there's a lot of discussion about Palestinians and there's not that many Palestinians that actually get the chance to speak for themselves. So I'm really happy to have you on this show at this time.
It's great to be here, and what you say is very true. I was earlier having a conversation with a Lebanese friend of mine, and we were talking about something similar, which is very often people who talk about the Middle East, aside from the fact that most of them have never even been there, an even bigger problem is that they treat Middle Easterners, both politicians and the people and Middle Eastern peoples, as pure subjects and reactionary to American foreign policy or Israel, and uh, these especially on the American left, not entirely, but especially on the American left. And I cannot think of anything worse, more condescending, even racist, than denying Middle Easterners of agency, as if they are not humans. They are just robots that react to what we in the United States or you in Israel do. It is indisputable that a lot of what happens is a reaction. Human events are actions and reactions. And Middle Easterners react to our conduct just as we react to theirs, but it is quite silly to say that they lack agency and that's how they are treated. So I'm very excited to have this conversation about what happens in Iran and especially the agency of the regime and the Iranian people.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. And one point of criticism that I receive from those who do criticize my show, because I tend to be extremely center, I just give the news on my show and I rarely give opinion or commentary. People are often asking, why don't you talk about the Palestinians? There's not enough Palestinian representation. And I say, while you may think that me not speaking for Palestinians is inappropriate, I think that it is more appropriate, meaning people want to see a more left-wing side of me. And I actually think the most left-wing thing I could do is allow Palestinians to speak for themselves. And in this case, we're going to have you talk to us. So your parents were political prisoners in Iran, and you left Iran in your early 20s to pursue independence and education. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Tell us about your upbringing and how your parents got put into jail.
Uh, so let's start from where you ended. My parents met at the Communist Party of Iran, and I always joke because I am quite conservative. I always joke that I was conceived in Marxism Leninism, and after uh, when they were dating, they my father first went to prison. He was there for 5 years, and later on, my mom went to prison. She was there only for 5 months. Uh, I They got married after, shortly after. I was born right after that. I grew up in a very political family, as you can imagine, and I grew up with politics. The one thing that was always evident to me because of my family's background was the evil character of the Islamic Republic. More so that there were two elements to it. One was the tyranny of the regime. The second element was the religious character of the regime, the theocracy. I mention this because my parents were atheists, they were communists, and the religious element of growing up without religion in a religious government and a religious society was quite difficult. And that was my upbringing, being at home in a secular family, and a family that quite, especially my father, clinged on the Persian identity, the Iranian identity, I should say, not Persian, that my family had, as opposed to the Islamic identity that you would see in society, and it was a dual life. Now, flash forward, and for your viewers' interest, also I grew up in a family that there were no Jews around us, but I grew up in a family that was completely fine with Israel as a country and had no anti-Semitic. There was no anti-Semitism, let's say, in my family. I remember I was once talking, and Israel or Jews would not come up often at our house because they were not relevant subject of the society, since there were no Jews around. Once I was talking and I used the word Jehud in reference to Jews, and that's a slur, and I didn't know that that's what I had heard growing up. And my dad immediately says, "Never say that. That's a slur. Just call them Yahudi," which is not a slur. So that was the family I grew up in, and there was this duality, because you have to go to school, you have to be in the society, you have to pretend something that you are not, and that was partially the tyranny of the regime, but also partially the state of the society at the time. The regime was unpopular, but Iranian people were not revolutionary anti-regime like I was, like my family was, and they were definitely anti-Zionist at the time.
Your family,
No, the society.
right? The
The
society.
society.
That
Yeah,
would be
so I had to
interesting.
live
Okay.
a dual life, that at home I'm one thing and outside I'm doing my best to pretend to be another thing, or at least hide what I am if I'm not pretending otherwise.
Right.
We're now 20 years or more past that time that I was growing up, and a society that I left behind in 2011 is unrecognizable to me in all the best ways. I had friends I could talk with, I could trust, despite our disagreements. I was open about my views, and I would always get the pushback. Why are you so right wing? The Americans are imposing sanctions on us. The Israelis are killing Palestinians and Lebanese. All such things. Why are you so critical of the reform movement? That's our best hope for change. Now I'm talking to the same friends that I still keep in touch with, and I look at the rest of the society. They like Bibi Netanyahu. I have my criticisms of the prime minister, and they call me a traitor because I'm too soft on my support for Israel. How could you not love Bibi Netanyahu? Why do you not love Donald Trump? He's great. He's imposing all these sanctions on the regime. And this is unrecognizable, and it shows you how much Iranians have changed. And I mentioned the religious character, not of the regime, but also the society. And more than anything, that has changed. Today, less than a third of Iranians identify to pollsters as Shiite Muslims. Most identify as some sort of secular, religious, agnostic, atheist. And that has been the association between the tyranny of the regime and the religious character of the regime that has purged the society of, not the society, but private citizens purged Islam from the hearts of Iranians. And I have a friend whose father is a septuagenarian. Since he was a teenager, so in Shiite Islam, there is something called Nazri. You make a pledge to God that if you grant this wish of mine, if you heal me, or if you heal my child or sister, or if you grant me this wish, whatever it could be, if I get this job, I'll distribute Nazri, which is usually once a year on a religious holiday. You go and distribute food among the poor. In this septuagenarian man would go every year back to his hometown and distribute food once a year every year. Until a few years ago, my friend goes to his dad and says, "Wait, this is the holiday. Why are you not back home?" This man is in his 70s and he's been doing this for 60 plus years. And he says, "Well, son, after all these years, I've arrived at the conclusion that all of this is bleep, BS." And that shows you how much the society has changed, that you can purge. It is not easy to purge religion from a 70 plus year old man. But when that happens, it shows you how strong the negative reaction to the regime has become.
So would you say that the regime has become so extreme that people are associating the regime with the religion and are rejecting religion based on the extremeness of the regime? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, I would just say that the regime has not become more extreme. It's just that the extreme character of the regime has become much more is being felt more and more.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point that people hoped for reform to change the regime. People have given up on that. That is very important, that Iranians have completely abandoned the reform movement of the 1990s and 2000s. They don't think that reforming the regime is possible. And two, the regime has spent almost half a century destructing the economic infrastructure of Iran and being in battle with Iranians' proud heritage of 2.5 millennia, trying to replace that heritage with an Islamic heritage. Even Iranians who are practicing Muslims today or were practicing Muslims 10, 15 years ago still are proud of their Iranian heritage. Again, it's a country of 2,500 years history. It's not easy to convince them to drop that overnight. And the continuation of this destruction of the country culturally and morally and economically has been going on so long and has been effectively so successful that is what people are feeling. It's the success of that destruction that people are feeling, and that is what is radicalizing them against the regime.
So Shay, what year were you born?
89.
Okay, so you were born 10 years after the Islamic Revolution changed not only Iran, but the entire region, and maybe even you could say the world in 1979. Tell me from your view, what are the radical differences that your parents may have noticed or that you have been told um, were different before 1979 when the Shah was thrown out and the Islamic Revolution happened in 1979? What were the major changes in Iranian society?
Uh, if you don't mind, let me actually go back even further than that, because there is a change that happens that leads to the revolution, which is economic progress happens in Iran combined with land reform. And without getting into the details of why, this land reform and economic progress that was not distributed in the villages, it was only distributed in larger cities, brings the villagers out of the village to these larger cities. These cities are already liberal culturally and becoming even more liberal. And the peasants who are arriving are quite religious and conservative. And suddenly they see an Iran that they cannot recognize. And they hate it.
Can I
So,
pause you here? So
yes, of
you're
course.
telling me that there are Iranians that were in the outskirts that are now coming into cities. They're bringing their more religious and conservative ways with them. They're coming to cities throughout Iran, maybe Tehran, the capital, and they are experiencing a more Western society and Iranian identity than what they were experiencing in other parts of the country, as Iran is quite enormous. Is that what you're trying to
Yes,
say?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And they resent the country they are living in, and they had no idea until now that it existed. This is under the Shah. And that leads that is a major factor, if not the biggest factor, of the revolution. On top of that, a lot of these peasants who are arriving are unemployed because of the land reform policies that tried to actually help the villagers by distributing them land, except that they didn't know how to work on the land. So they arrive in the cities without jobs. They're still struggling to find employment. They hate the culture they're seeing. That attracts them to Khomeini. So, what is that culture that they're seeing? My grandfather would always talk about how great it was under the Shah. Why was it so great? On next to each other, you had a bar and a mosque. That was how liberal it was. Uh, Women were walking around with their boyfriends, uh, showing affection in public. Young women dressing very liberally. You had pop music everywhere. Pop rock and roll actually was becoming very popular in Iran, and this is the society they arrive in from the villages, from the outskirts, and they hate it. And that's the society they rebel against. That's the society that my parents would look back at fondly. So, what is the society I experience? Uh, 15, 20 years later, when I'm in my, when I'm, let's say, when I'm 10, what I remember. It's a society that lacks music. There's no music in the society. If there is music, it's religious uh, music of mourning, which is big in Shiism.
Can you explain that? Because I think that I understand what you mean, but that might not be. I understand what you mean because I relate to that in Israeli culture, but can you
Right.
explain what that might mean to others?
Right. So for religious holidays, which are in Iran mostly on the anniversaries of a saint's martyrdom, for some reason they are not fond of celebrating birthdays. Uh, they have large gatherings for these mornings and mourning the passing of the saint, the martyrdom of the saint, and especially for the third imam, which is who was Hussein, and it has a specific significance for Shiites. And these, it's not musical as much as it's singing of a mourner to, and the singing is meant to be sad to make you cry. And you see these scenes that everybody's wearing black, and there is someone who's singing an extremely poignant, sad, upsetting tone, and everybody's crying. It is not a happy event, and it's an event that happens quite often. And on TV, it's again, you see the same thing. When I was growing up, there were three, eventually four TV channels, all state TV. They're all showing a variety of this scene. You go out in the public, it's the same. And it is a very, very, very sad society. And then you go to, there are celebrations too during the year, except that most of these celebrations are associated with the regime, which people, even those who were pro-reform, did not associate with. Nobody wanted to celebrate the anniversary of the revolution. So even the celebrations are not something you would want to participate in.
And you were aware of
And
when you were growing up? Were you aware of did you have the awareness that the reality and society around you was something that people were rejecting, or was this just the way that it was and it took you time until you became an adult to realize that maybe you had a culture clash internally?
no, the clash was very evident to me at the time because the first thing one of my earliest memories is being 6 maybe and being handed a glass of wine and being told that this is essentially civil disobedience. So I was already being raised on that on dissent.
Okay, so
Uh,
let's move into the Israel angle here and
yeah.
talk to us about why you chose the Israel Daily News as your outlet to share about your history, your experience, and your message. I'm sure you have a very good reason why you wanted to join us at the Israel Daily News. So please share.
Uh, it comes down to a few factors. First is that Iranian, like most Iranians, we find our heritage in Cyrus. And I always remind people that Zionism begins with Cyrus, not in the 19th century.
Talk to us about Cyrus very briefly. Tell everybody who he is.
So Cyrus is the first Achaemenid emperor of Iran and arguably the first great emperor in history who goes to Babylon, annexes Babylon, and liberates Babylonian Jews and facilitates their return to Israel, which is the Zionist part, or they could, or gives them protection should they decide to live in Iran, which is even to this day there are up to 15,000 Iranian Jews living inside Iran.
So let
So
me just pause right here because this is so
yeah,
exciting, and I know about this. But the idea is that this great emperor, and when you say Babylon, a lot of people don't associate Persia and Babylon. So the the emperor had rule over all of this land, including Babylon at the time, and there were a lot of Jews living there, and we have documents about this. And the idea was that this emperor wanted to allow the return of Jews living in Babylon under the Persian Empire to return to the kingdom of Judea, which did exist back then. Correct?
yes, but just one more important factor is that before his conquest of Babylon, at the time Babylon is not part of his empire. He and the Jews in Babylon were slaves. He annexes Babylon, conquers Babylon, liberates the slaves, and then exactly what you say. So Iranians look back to Cyrus as their national saint, as their secular saint, and you see great pilgrimage at his tomb once a year in the fall, which the regime hates and tries to crack down on. And well, one thing for me is that I like Cyrus, and that is he's essentially my national saint too. And looking back at him, one thing that he did right, in my opinion, was Zionism. So I that is one national reason for me to like Israel. The second one is much more personal, which is I've been a beneficiary of Jewish charity. I've been in, I've had to live my life without a family for the past 12 years. And it's always been Jews, Americans, or Israelis who rushed to help me. And many of them didn't know me even very, well at the time. We eventually became much closer. And I have just a personal fondness of the Jewish people and of the Jewry, and especially because there are many similarities that I see between Jews and Persians. Uh, and last, there's a shared interest. And the shared political interest is that Iranians and Israelis are both the biggest victims of the Islamic Republic. And then you have all the Arabs in the Middle East that we can throw in. But I'm not an Arab, so I'm Iranian, and there's a great common cause between Iran and Israel. And especially, I mentioned Israel and not other Arab countries who also hate the Islamic Republic for good reason, because Israel is a liberal democracy. And I always would rather have free countries and free societies as my allies. And that's Israelis. They are the perfect ally to have against the Islamic Republic. And our history goes back for 2,500 years. So those are the reasons that I like to engage with Israelis. It's my national heritage, it's my personal affection, and it's our shared interest.
I'd like you to send us off briefly with the time that we have a message of geopolitical futurist message, I should say. How do you see this moving forward, and what is your message when people look out and they see the war unfolding between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, which is Hamas as a proxy of Iran? What's your message to people who might be confused about Iran's intentions and or the current Iranian regime's intentions and vision for the geopolitical sphere moving forward?
The Islamic Republic has been quite clear that it wishes Israel not to exist. And I believe that the way they want to do that is not by nuking Israel in a way that would invite retaliation, but by making life in Israeli society so miserable that it forces a self exile of the Jews. You and I know that that's never going to happen. Israelis are not going to live. They will eat grass in Jerusalem before they leave it. And it's a misunderstanding that they have of Israel, but that's what they're going to do. And it doesn't mean because Israelis are not going to leave Israel, it doesn't mean that the Islamic Republic is not going to make life miserable there nonetheless. It's going to be very unpleasant if Iran gets its wish. And you see the war in Gaza right now. You see the threat from Lebanon. These are not things that are going to go away as long as the Islamic Republic is there. You can get rid of Hamas, you can get rid of Hezbollah, they will find a new way. They've shown to be very savvy over the past half a century. They will find a new way to make life difficult for Israelis, as they have done for everybody else around them and for the Iranian people. I hope that Israel wins this war decisively. I hope that it eradicates Hezbollah with minimal cost to Israeli lives. And those things should happen for the good of the Israelis. But those things are not going to get rid of the problem. The problem is going to come back as long as the regime is there. The only solution for our shared problem is regime change in Iran. And that's the only way that we can finally, both of us, Israelis and Iranians, live in peace.
So, Shay, I like how you've explained the history from 2,500 years ago to today. The question that I have and that I'm
It's a
constantly
short history, easy to overview.
a short history, but a good history, and it's so easy for people to forget how strong ties the Iranian people and the Jewish people have because they see Iran and Israel as enemies, but it's really only a very, very recent enemy in modern history. But because people are so short sighted and they only see what's right in front of them right today, they can never really look back or look forward. And so I invite you to explain to us how and why, mostly why, would the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran want to wipe Israel off of the map? And what I real is really important to me just to explain is I'm in a constant state of explaining to people why Iran would want to get rid of Israel or would want to see Israel wiped off the face of the map, because Americans in particular, and I think this is beautiful, but there's a naivety and a naivete, and they believe that everybody just wants the best for one another, and it's not really in the American DNA to want to see another culture go away or to want to see another country get wiped off the face of the map. It's not really in the liberal values or ideas to think that one religion is better than another religion. So Americans can't possibly understand why Iranians would spend any of their time and effort looking out of Iranian borders and trying to eliminate the state of Israel. Can you give our American audience, and you're living in the United States and you know Americans at this point, please explain to them why Iran would want to eradicate Israel?
So before I explain why, a better answer is to Americans that, well, it doesn't matter why really, because they do. It's there are people who are evil, and we should explore why they are evil, but it is what they are. And you can see it is indisputable that Hamas wants to eradicate Israel. And does it really matter why Hamas wants to do that? Because it clearly does. And now, having answered, and same as Iran, it does. And we should just accept that. Now, having said that, there's an explanation, which is uh, Americans have done a great job in separating religion from politics. And they, because of that, they do not have a concept of people who fail to do so, for a state that fails to do so, I should say. And we have our religious political movements in the United States, but they're nothing in comparison with having a state dedicated to that religion. Conceive of your worst theocratic politician in the United States, and imagine if that one person was the king of America and how America would look like. Now, multiply it by 10 times, 100 times, and that's what you get in Iran. Iran is a religious state, first and foremost. And because it's religious, because it has a divine mandate, not an earthly mandate. The mandate of the United States of America, of the US government, is protecting our rights. The mandate of the Islamic Republic is getting Iranians to heaven. Those are very different. And also, it's getting themselves to heaven. If you're Khamenei, you want your people to go to heaven, but you definitely want yourself to go to heaven too. How do you get to heaven? Well, one way is by having using your position to expand Islam. Just like there's a phrase in Arabic and Farsi, Sadr Islam, which means the dawn of Islam. What was happening in dawn of Islam? They were, from the Prophet forward, they were expanding the Islamic Empire. Okay, you are in that position now. You should do the same to go to heaven. You should do the same for the will of God. And Israel is a very unique case because it is also an opposition to the United States that the Islamic Republic was founded upon, and also less often talked about, an opposition to the United Kingdom that the Islamic Republic was founded upon, and they see Israel as a product of both. So you have that political element of it, which is anti-Americanism and anti-Britishism, if that's a thing, that they see Israel as a product of. And there is the mandate of heaven to have Islamic lands belonging to Muslims, and Jews are an obstacle to that. A Jewish state, by definition, is not an Islamic state, and they want to reverse that. And that word reverse is very important because this is not a conservative government, really, as much as a reversive government. It wishes to use modern tools to reverse the course of history back to where it used to be before modernity, to the dawn of Islam. And reversing that history necessitates getting rid of non-Islamic states in, first of all, in the Middle East, in the region, and eventually, if you're a utopian by the definition of the regime, the entire world. So that is the answer. It wishes to purge it. It's not as much as it wishes to purge Jews from the Middle East. Sure, you can be a Jew in an Islamic state and have be a secondary citizen there, but you cannot have a Jewish state. That is the answer.
And why is it important for you to talk about this and to raise awareness? Is that what you would say that you're doing by coming on to this show?
Yeah, of absolutely, and it's important for me because I say I'm Iranian, but more than anything, I'm American, and I care about my country's interest, and my country's interest is clearly, obviously, at odds with the Islamic Republic's interest. They have the blood of thousands of American troops on their hands. So there's that. There's the moral element of it as an American for me that I care about democracy and human rights of other peoples, Iranians, because that's where I grew up and I have affection for that country. But I would care about it if I were not Iranian, just the same way that I care about the human rights and democracy of Ukrainians or Uyghurs or North Koreans or you name it, or Venezuelans. And I've done some work on that too. I have the receipts to prove it. And I also care about Israelis. I mentioned earlier, I really, really, really love Jews. And I care about the interests of Israelis. And also, after all, I grew up in Iran. I have family there, I have friends there, I have romantic views of the country I grew up in, and the past that is a part of me. And I want freedom in that country. I want to be able to visit again.
Are you allowed to visit
No,
because you
I
left?
mean I'm allowed to visit. I'm just not allowed to live after I visit. So it's a small nuance.
You think that you would be killed?
At least in present, I am officially declared as a persona non grata in Iran by IRGC. So there would be issues with my return.
Can you tell us how did you have to smuggle yourself out of the country? How did you get
No, this is after I left. This is after I left because of my more recent activities. But the one of the reasons I left was that I was involved in the Green Movement in Iran in 2009, which were anti-government protests, and I was a bit of a hothead, which I remain to this day. And I eventually got expelled from college, and I was banned from academia altogether, and that just for my family not having a college education was unacceptable. So if I could not get it in Iran, I had to go to college elsewhere, and I was very excited about that because I didn't want to stay in Iran.
what were the exact charges that your parents were arrested for?
I honestly I don't even know about my mom. Being a communist was definitely one of them. Just being a member of the Communist Party was one of them, and it might have been the only charge for my mom. Sedition, they all throw all these things, sedition, etc. But for my dad, there was also atheism as one of his charges, uh, and again, being a member of the Communist Party, sedition. He was quite a high-ranking member too, so his charges were much greater than my mom's, who was a junior member.
And he was in prison for 5 years?
My dad was, yes.
And how was his time in prison?
Uh, that's a very interesting that's a whole different interesting topic I can talk at length about. But uh, he was tortured in prison. Uh, that was obviously unpleasant. Spent 2 or 2.5 years in solitary confinement, something like that. And on other than that, uh, he it became a community in itself because they were all political prisoners all together there, and they managed to survive through bonding in their cells. And there are stories he would tell me which are quite insane, such as how they would make alcohol in the bathroom using watermelons to get drunk, and other such stories of essentially of mechanisms of coping and survival in a very unpleasant situation.
How old were you when your father was in prison?
This is before I was born,
This was
so
before
they
you.
got married afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, a very, very difficult experience. And where do your parents reside today?
My dad died almost 2 years ago. They were together in Iran until my dad passed away, and my mom is still back there.
I'm sorry to hear about the passing of your father.
Thank you.
How are you able to see your mom?
I have not for 10 years now.
Will you be able to in the future?
We hope so. We hope so. There are complications all around. Mostly more than anything is because of my immigration status. I'm on asylum here, but leaving the country, coming back are not very easy for me. And financially and politically, coming to the United States is not the best idea for her. So we're trying to find alternative means.
Well, we here at the Israel Daily News pray and hope that you'll be reunited with your mom and that we'll have peace and alignment in the Middle East and around the globe. And thank you for your activism, not only with Iranians and Jews and Israelis, but with all of the other communities that you would like to
Thank you.
see liberated from dictatorships and oppressive regimes. So, kol hakavod, as we say in Hebrew, all the respect goes to you. And thank you
Toda rabba.
for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.